be perfect. Thank you.
There's no way to subtly start the recording.
No, which I think is actually a good thing. So that was basically my introduction to what we're doing and how we're trying to integrate what we're working on today into the broader project. And I'll be happy to, maybe after the main session, if there are any other questions or ideas or discussion that we want to have about the data management training clearinghouse in general, I'm sure Nancy and I would be happy to have whatever discussion you would like, as we're absolutely seeking all the input that we can from the community in terms of how we continue to evolve the clearinghouse. And we just recently received the confirmation from IMLS that our 1-year no-cost extension has been approved. So we're going to be continuing work on the clearinghouse through basically the end of next June. And we've been able to reallocate some of our resources so that we have continued developer support to contribute to those activities. So things are looking good in terms of being able to take the feedback we get today and the feedback that we get from some future usability tests events to integrate that into the clearinghouse as it first goes live and then evolves over the coming now just under a year. These are just some links to the shared notes for today and the slides that I've just been showing if you wanted to look at them later. And with that, I'll hand it over to Sophie.
Great, thanks so much, Carl. And for my section, for my part of the introduction, I'm just going to give everybody a really quick overview of what you are about to do when we break into the breakout rooms. The reason why we ask you about whether or not you're familiar with usability testing is that in the breakout rooms today, you will be using a usability testing technique to help in reviewing the designs that we have and give us your feedback. Usability is a great way for us to get feedback, and there are a lot of different formats. And so if you're familiar with it, there are 3 of you, that's great. But if you're like Susan, you've never done it before, please don't worry, because even though it's called usability testing and it's called by a lot of other names, you might have heard of it before by user study, user testing, or some kind of reference about maybe might have make you feel like you are the person under test or you're the test subject, but it's absolutely not true. All we need you to do is that we will, if you're willing to share your thoughts, share your rationale for reacting to the designs the way that you do, then you will be helping us out quite a bit. So again, in terms of how we call this process, we're calling usability testing, but you absolutely don't need any kind of preparation for it. We just love for you to be able to share your thoughts with us, and that's what's going to be, that's what's going to make the breakout sessions helpful and informative for us. And I mentioned there are different formats. The format that we're going to be using is going to be role-based. Carl's already talked about how we're going to go through 2 different scenarios. When you get into the room, the moderator, in this case, I will be in one room and Carl will be in the other room. We will be reading to you, or we'll be explaining to you what the roles are. We'll also be describing to you what the scenarios you will be working in. So if you have any questions about the role, about the scenario, please feel welcome to speak up and to get clarification. We'll be moderating throughout the process, meaning that we'll be asking you questions for you to react to. We'll be asking you to answer specific questions depending on the design you're looking at. And so please feel welcome to share as much as you feel comfortable with, but also, again, ask questions. We hope that this is also an opportunity to co-design with you. If you think that something isn't working well based on your experience, based on your expectation of the clearinghouse, we would love to hear that from you. So that's what we are going to be doing in the breakout sessions. And each set or each scenario is going to take about 40 minutes, as Carl has mentioned. But the most important part, we just hope that you will feel comfortable in interacting with us and will find this fun. Thank you.
Okay, one more thing. While I'm thinking about it, there will be note takers in both rooms. I'll be taking notes in one, and Christina will be taking another. But all the notes will be at the bottom of the agenda document. So if you want to add, if you can't get a word in edgewise, possibly, you can go ahead and write down your notes in your comments in the agenda as well, the notes section below. So I just want to make sure people had that. We're welcome to do that too.
Great.
Any
And,
questions?
I've gone-
Oh, sorry. Oops, sorry, Carl.
Yeah,
I just
go ahead,
wanted to check
Sophie.
in.
No,
Yeah,
go.
check in with the room to see if there's any question about the explanation or just the preview about what we're going to do in the breakout rooms. Right. Not hearing any, Carl.
Okay, so I've set up the breakout room and populated it, just sort of grabbing folks at random from our list of participants. And so I'm ready to go ahead and open it up. And hopefully those of you that have been assigned to the breakout room will see a notification to join that room. And then the rest of us who don't magically whisk off to the breakout room will stay here in the main room and go through the parallel and same set of scenarios. So we'll be doing the same thing in both rooms, but we're just splitting up to provide a more manageable group size in each one. So we'll go ahead and open up the breakout room now. And hopefully folks are getting, I'm seeing folks moving in. Okay, it looks like
Anyone who is a co-host is not going to be on the list. So I can remove co-host if you need to move someone. And
yeah, it looks like we may need to move Sophie.
okay.
Because Sophie, I think we need you in the other room.
Do you want her in the main room or in the in room one?
Room one, please,
In
Susan.
room one.
Okay, you should move you to room one. It shows me that you're there.
Oh,
Yeah, it's showing that she's there but not joined. So Sophie, are you seeing a? Oh, there you go.
Now, someone in room one is going to need to hit record. So I'm going to just go join that room and tell them to record. I'll be right.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so here we are in our merry little band, and the windows are now shifting around on me for our discussion here in the main room. So as Sophie mentioned, we're going to be going through two scenarios, and in each of those scenarios, we're going to be essentially trying to put ourselves in the shoes of a particular type of user who would be interacting with the assessment capabilities of the data management training clearinghouse. And our first scenario is essentially interacting with the clearinghouse as a learner or a consumer, a direct consumer of the learning resources. And this is something in our research that we found is a common desire by a lot of folks, is that they're looking for materials that they can use for their own self-paced learning. And in this case, that's the role that we're taking on in this particular scenario. So in particular, the role that, or the scenario that we're setting up for the learner that we're asking you to essentially put yourself in the shoes of is a learner who's looking for or looking at the reviews that have been provided by others of the different learning resources that are in the clearinghouse to actually save some time in winnowing through the items that come up as a result of a search to be able to look at what others have provided in terms of feedback about those resources, to be able to home in on learning resources that would be most relevant to their learning needs. So in particular, we're putting ourselves in the shoes of a first-year PhD student who's asked to write a draft data management plan for a grant that's being developed by the project PI that they're working with. And while you've been involved in writing the grant proposal and you know a lot about the research, you really don't have much of an understanding of data management plans or data management planning. You know, what a DMP is, what is used for, what should be included in that data management plan, and essentially the range and depth of the information that's needed for that plan. So that's the type of materials that we would be looking for in the data management training clearinghouse. As is always the case, the turnaround time for the proposal that this data management plan needs to be integrated in is very tight. So we're needing to be able to spin up our knowledge in data management planning as quickly as possible. And so you're using the data management or the data management training clearinghouse to search for resources to be able to quickly acquire that data management planning expertise that's needed, including looking for learning resources with examples and interactive activities, discussions of software that can be used to help the data management planning process. But again, you don't have time to explore all of these at your leisure, and you're wanting to use the DMTC's assessment capabilities to help quickly identify the resources that we're looking at. So what we're going to do is I'm going to share with you some screenshots from the data management training clearinghouse that sort of illustrates the interface and some of the options in the interface that we've developed. And we're then going to go through a series of questions and discussion points about what we have in place. So I'm going to go ahead and share my scenario 1 slides and see if I can move this to a different window, so I can effectively share it. There we go. And let's see. Okay, how do I put this in presentation mode? Okay, there we go, present. And of course, my entire Zoom interface has disappeared now. So I need to briefly exit my mode here so I can actually share my screen first. Details.
Is it a presentation I can grab and share for you, Carl?
I think I've just gotten my act together here.
You've got it.
So now I can go into my presentation mode and show you the slides that we have set up for the scenario. And I'm going to move the intruding Zoom windows to another screen. Okay. So this, what you're seeing here is basically the scenario that I just described for you. And again, with the goal here being to quickly, as a learner, be able to use the assessment information that has been captured about the learning resources to help streamline your process of selecting learning resources to use for your data management planning training. So the first thing that we want to do is talk about the starting point in working with the DMTC in terms of where you might look for assessment information. So what we want to do is talk about in this case, a scale of 1 to 5, just even the basic premise that we're operating under here in terms of how important having available this assessment information would be, given the scenario that we've laid out, with you as a learner wanting to efficiently or quickly narrow down a collection of candidate resources to meet your needs. So let's just have a brief conversation about that first, in terms of, on a scale ranging from not important at all to being very important. How would you rate the value of having the assessments provided by others as a source of information? And I think we can just unmute ourselves and go ahead and just chime in. We're a small enough group that I think that will be practical.
So this is Madison. I would say, I think it depends on the form that it takes. I think I guess I should speak for myself. I'm very used to things like Amazon, right? Where you have the star, plus some written text. And so being able to filter by the ones that have 5 stars and see, what they liked about them, and then kind of digging into the text. But if I just have to kind of read through all of the evaluations in order to determine if they thought it was good or not, I think that would be less useful.
Okay, great, thank you. Other comments or suggestions related to this question of essentially the importance of having this information available to you as in the process of selection?
This is Sarah. I would agree with the star rating or some type of rating to be able to filter comments or criteria. In the specific scenario presented here, I'm not sure I would go to a clearinghouse looking for examples on data management plans. I found that the data management plan templates will vary by grant. So I would often want an example from that specific grant program. That would be my first place to look to see sort of how to modify that template or example based on the specific requirements of the grant. If it was just a request for the form without any guidelines, then I might go to a clearinghouse, but I think it really depends on the scenario.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Natalie, I saw you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I was going to say that for me, if I were a grad student, a first-year PhD student who had to write one of these, similarly, I don't know, the DMTC would be my first stop. But if it were, then the thing I use reviews or ratings for is sorting. Simply show me the highest rated one at the top. So what I did, pretending I was that grad student, was go to the current data management training clearinghouse, click browse, and there's no sort feature.
Right.
So when you go to browse, you can't sort, you can only filter by framework. I think that's the place where you'd be like, I want to see DMP's the most highly ranked one first. And that kind of sort functionality is missing on the browse page. So that would be where in that hit list place would be the place where I'd expect to see it.
Okay.
The ability to
great.
sort by highest reviewed or highest star.
And it sounds like that is sort of building on what Sarah and Madison were suggesting in terms of having some sort of composite rating that could then effectively feed into that sorting mechanism.
Yeah, because if we do the same thing and we search and we just type DMP, because that's all the PI told the student, we get 24 results, but again, we can't sort them. And we don't even know what order they're sorted in. It might be alphabetical. It's hard
Mhm.
to tell,
Right.
really know when you have no
Yeah.
control over it as the user. So again, that's a place where maybe ratings could help, or
Mhm.
stars or something, but yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's very helpful. Um, Tamara, Mary, Teddy, any input here?
I think a little bit more than whether or not there's a review is how the reviews are written. Because if the
Mhm.
top 5 just say this was great, that's not telling me anything. And even
Okay.
more than a review, well, like what I do now, my contracting company offers training, and I find 4 or 5 I think are interesting on a topic, and then I watch the first 5 minutes to see if I like the way the training's being conducted. So a preview of the training or an idea, I guess the analogy is in the app store on anybody's phone. There's usually screenshots of the training, of the app you're going to buy, possibly a video showing someone using it. And that is always a lot better than any review. But I will admit to always looking at the people who give it 1 star or no stars and see what their complaint is. Because if their complaint is that it didn't work on my particular brand of phone, that's not really going to influence me very much. I know that it's that person's problem with the app, not the app's problem.
Right. Okay, great. Yeah, that's helpful. Tamara, did you have something to add?
Only to second the fact that I think reviews are useful. Especially when you're deciding between multiple resources and trying to figure out the best use of your time.
Great, thanks. Well, as our time is limited here, we're gonna go ahead and move on to our second question that actually relates to actually interacting now some with the interface itself. So I'm gonna advance the screen here. And this is a sample of essentially one of our learning resources, showing the current documentation about that resource that we have in the Clearinghouse. And what we want to ask here is, if you were essentially looking at the detailed information about a learning resource, where would you expect to find or access the information associated with reviews for that resource? Sort of where on this page, if you were to sort of insert it into the page?
I think it might depend on how your reviews are structured. If we have a star or ranking type of review that we've been talking about, I might expect the ranking to be right underneath the title, but then the actual reviews would be down at the end, and it would be something that you would link down to.
Okay, yeah, that sounds highly reasonable. Other suggestions or ideas?
I think I would just second that. Like, I was thinking, you would see an overview of like the ranking at the top, like maybe next to the title. I was thinking next to the title, but under the title, somewhere up top. And then, yeah, but then have the actual written text reviews down lower, like below all of the standard metadata.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I know Natalie had to step away for a moment. So Teddy, Tamar, Mary, any suggestions on this? And looks like Natalie just came back to potentially chime in as well on this question of where, if you're landing on a page, you might expect to find information about or access to the reviews.
For just a link, I think I would expect just a link to be under additional information. If you put the stars up top, if you're going with stars or whatever, it kind of tells me that DMTC is verifying or in some way backing up those stars. It'll look official up there. And so if you're just going to go on users do, doing their review, just like on Amazon, people who are selling something get their family to give them good reviews, so it looks good,
Mhm.
So if you have it up that high, I'm going to assume it's in air quotes official in some way, that it's verified, or that you have DMTC has in some way accrediting these reviews.
So in this case, the sort of the more prominent location towards the top of the page, it sounds like from what you're describing, implies a certain amount of credibility or assessment by the DMTC itself in terms of representing that summary score.
Exactly. Because I know, I believe it's Amazon, it might be eBay. One of the two, you can send in a review on certain products, and it has to get verified that you're a real person, that you're actually bought this, and they have record of you buying something. So yeah, if the higher up you're putting it, it's going to seem, like I said, official in some way.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a helpful insight as that credibility component is one that we hadn't really talked about, but I think that's a useful thing to be keeping in mind. Any other comments on this in terms of where you might look for the information about the reviews?
I get the comment about the credibility, but would you still want the review link towards the top, even if you're not presenting the results? At a certain point, I'm not sure someone would scroll down far low enough to actually see that reviews exist.
Mm-hmm.
So how
how
prominent the existence or option of this feature of reviews do you want visible to users?
Mm-hmm. So we would potentially need to try to balance between the implied credibility of or authoritativeness of the reviews versus visibility of the review as an option, or the reviews as an available feature of the information about the resource.
Yeah, that's a better way of phrasing what I was trying to go with there.
Well, and I think
thanks.
I think that under additional information, like that isn't that far down on the page. Like it seems like, at least from this one anyway, that it would always be kind of above the fold. And especially if you did go with the star model, I think stars stand out to me. And so it might catch my attention even if we're down there. But I think if I had done like the sorting, so if before I get to this landing page, if I had been sorting by rank or rating, then what was I going to say about that? I don't know. Like I just think that it should be apparent before we get here that there's some sort of score associated with this resource.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and I think that's helpful. And Natalie.
If we look at the example on SourceForge, they have most popular, last updated, name and rating as your sort options. And if a record doesn't have any downloads, doesn't have any reviews, and doesn't have any updates, its metadata is just blank, and all the metadata appears across the bottom row of the hit list record display. So for example, if I'm looking at CAD software, some of them have X number of reviews, some of them have none. If they have downloads or views, so we could say how many views has this DMTC resource had and show that. We could show when this resource
Mhm.
was last updated, and people could choose to sort by those. And the stars just show up over in the left for the ones that have them, but it's
Mhm.
perfectly okay to be a new thing with no stars. You
Right.
just
Right.
don't find that one when you sort by rating. So we need
Mhm.
a system that accommodates rated stuff and unrated stuff.
Okay.
And
Yeah. And
that's why I like their example, because you can be popular because you're viewed a lot or downloaded a lot, but you can also be rated. And it's
mhm.
possible to be neither one. Maybe nobody looked at you and nobody
Right.
rated you because you're brand new, or you're super obscured, beware the leopard. Either one's okay.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I think that is a
Thanks.
good
That
point. Something that's really important for this resource in particular is the when it was last updated, because something from 10 years ago may no longer be applicable to your current proposal. Things may have changed,
mhm.
and so being able that I think that should weigh in on the assessments.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. That is definitely something I've been that we've been talking about as we've been looking at our enhanced metadata model for being able to capture and provide additional information. So that's a good confirmation of the discussions we've been having. Okay, anything else before we sort of go on to our next question and sort of illustration of at least one illustration of positioning, in this case, what could be multiple surveys that have been designed and associated with a particular learning resource, and the access, the different ways of accessing those resources. So in this case, we actually have 3 different assessment surveys associated with this. And I'll be quiet here and just first ask for your initial reaction to the presentation, the information that's provided, the labeling, the clarity of what the options are, and then we can then we'll look actually at the results for our final question.
I guess I'm
Yes,
a little
Madison.
unclear. So the 3 things at the top is what you're asking us to respond to?
Yes, in terms of how useful is this placement? How clear is it that we're in this case presenting multiple surveys? How does the phrasing, providing that information, or the visual presentation, how clear is that to you? How useful is this to you? Areas for improvement?
I guess the having 3 is a little confusing to me. I assume the first one, test survey with range. I don't know I have no idea what that means. It seems like it might be like it's just a trial one or something, like maybe it got left in there or something.
Yeah.
Learner consumer survey, I think, makes a little more sense. So if I used that, if I came here to learn from the training, then that might be a survey that I would either take with the little edit button or view the results of. But then again, demo survey kind of is the same as the test one for me. It's like, why is that still here if it's just a demo?
Right. Well, and your questions are good ones because sort of under the hood, what we're presenting here are the labels that have been associated with the surveys that have been created. So yeah, I think you're highlighting an important characteristic that we need to keep in mind in terms of what information and in terms of potential audience or content needs to be included in those labels to make it clear what those separate surveys are, because one of the capabilities that we've developed is the capacity to have multiple surveys associated with an individual learning resource, or in the case of some of these, the ability to have essentially reuse a set of survey questions across across multiple learning resources. And that's actually the case for the demo survey and the learner consumer survey. As we were developing this demo, we had both of those and put them, basically linked them to all of the learning resources. But your comments highlight the importance for me of making sure that we have clear descriptive labels for the surveys. Natalie.
As a user, that heading, log in to access assessment and workflow capabilities for this resource, is too verbose and doesn't encourage me to do anything. So if the goal is to get the user to do something for you, you got to tell them what the thing is you want them to do and how you're going to use it. So log in to rate this resource. Please rate this resource, log in here, tell them exactly what you want to do. And maybe after they log in, tell them how that will benefit people beside them or you. The part where before you log on, or before you rate something, it shows the available assessment surveys. That doesn't make any sense to the end user because they think those are going to be DMTC resources that they can use and reuse. Oh, here's surveys about data one data management plans. That's not really what they're about. Right? They're not a DMTC resource, the surveys themselves. I mean, they are, but they aren't.
Well, in this case, yeah, the surveys are DMTC resources, but they are about the learning resources that are developed elsewhere. So, yeah, there's some. It sounds like we're in one case we're promoting to a highly prominent position what is really sort of an informational message that should go someplace else in terms of that login line. And in the other, we're probably not providing enough information in terms of the way we're describing what the surveys are and why anybody should care about them. Is that a reasonable?
Even why they're called surveys, right? If they're over, they're not surveys any longer. If you can still participate in them, they're still surveys. Otherwise, they're just data or analysis of survey data. And another way of thinking about it is you want the DMTC when you get to a asset record to show that record to the user first. So you're putting something inconsequential to the user as consumer before the thing you promised them. That always feels like bait and switch because you get there and you're like, now what do you want me to do? Why are you showing me this thing? Right.
Okay.
And those are just lazy user observations, but let's work on the theory that everybody's a lazy user, right?
Yeah, that assumption has seldom been again violated in my experience.
Totally. Yeah, give them what you told them you were going to give them right up front.
Yeah. But yeah, that comment about open and closed surveys is a good one because those pencils are supposed to indicate a survey to which you can respond, but clarifying that it sounds like we need to do some additional work there.
Yeah, because I kind of be like, well, do I go, if I go here, am I going to get the questionnaire and I can distribute surveys, or am I going to get to be a participant in a survey, or am I reading the results and why do I care?
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful. As of course we're in the development process and engaged in it, and our mental assumptions bring familiarity that the naive user is very helpful in getting their initial experience with this.
Yeah, and your naive user
Other
doesn't want to give you any time.
Right, right. Exactly. Any other comments or suggestions on this?
I kind of agree with everything that's been said. I think you need to simplify it and potentially just, have a provide feedback link or something that pops up the bigger menu. You've given too much prominence to the words, and I don't know what any of them really mean. So if you have that provide feedback link that opens up a bigger window, do you have someone select their role? Are they providing feedback as a user of the materials? Are they providing feedback as someone that was a trainer that utilized these materials? Like, I'm assuming that those 3 different types of surveys are somehow role-based.
Yes, they can be, and that's one of the characteristics of the system is that basically we can compose new surveys based on collections of questions, and one element of that has been the capability to ask questions about, in some respects, sort of those demographic questions that would help us provide some context for the responses that are being provided. So yeah, those are important characteristics that we ultimately, especially in some contexts, will need to be able to capture and integrate into the responses. So
yeah,
we had one. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna just say, the language seems very advanced and not necessarily something that the novice would pick up on. So I think it needs to be a little bit more plain language and actually say what it is, or if it is role-based, somehow identify the role that will get you to the next step versus having someone need to understand the terminology.
Right. Well, and actually that's going to relate to a question, an impending question. This is good. We have one more sort of example from the output that we wanted to ask. And this is, in this case, in this scenario, we're focusing on the results of a survey and their utility in being able to inform this learner consumer role need for being able to do the filtering. And in that case, let me switch over to our next screen, where this is actually just a variation of an earlier iteration that just had direct links to the survey to be completed. So it's a variation on that, on the first theme, with the primary difference being you have 2 icons for taking the survey or viewing the results, instead of just having a link to taking the survey. So this is one that we've also included. And I guess I would ask, is this potentially headed in a useful direction in terms of simplification or clarification, or is it more even more obscure because we don't even necessarily have those explanatory icons?
I don't know that those explanatory icons explained very much, actually. Not knowing what was going to happen when we went to any of this before. I wanted to agree with what everyone said before on the previous slide, but also learn a consumer survey. I thought that might have been a brand of consumer survey, like American Customer Satisfaction Index. So you're referring
okay.
to, yeah, that's how you probably refer to people internally, but that's not how they think of themselves when they come here necessarily.
Right.
You know, so I, again, had no idea what that was about. I still have no idea what workflow capabilities for this resource means either.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, clearly there's some clarification that needs to be done in the descriptive terms that we're using and the labeling of the survey or surveys that are associated with any given learning resource.
And the available
And
assessment surveys is not actually asking anybody to do anything again. Maybe take a survey
mm-hmm,
or participate in a
mm-hmm,
survey. Then I would realize, oh, they want me to click on one of these to go to a survey that I'm going to fill out, as opposed to they're showing me people's reviews, so to speak, you know, how people have
mm-hmm.
surveyed and answered about this resource.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And that's helpful for being able to also think about where it gets presented in the broader context of information about the learning resource, and being more clear about what actions are possible for the user viewing the information about the resource.
Yeah, and that positioning thing, it seems odd that you're asking people to take a survey about this resource before they even got to the title of the resource.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's very helpful. And you know, now that we're talking about these things, it's like, well, of course, that seems obvious now. And it's only again when you have a fresh set of eyes looking at this that, you know, the things that that are not apparent to you as you're doing some initial development and layout only become clear when they're pointed out by others. So we had one other example that we wanted to show for some feedback, and that is, and this is a mock-up of one potential way of essentially presenting and summarizing the results of a particular survey that is associated with the learning resource. So this is a mock-up of both the set of questions. In this case, these are questions that have sort of qualitative options that folks could choose one of, and then summaries of those, and then also some of the free text responses, and of course gibberish lorem ipsum text, but sort of the potential layout and presentation of that information as well. So, you know, thinking about the questions, the way they're presented, how the results are being presented, would this be valuable to you in the scenario that we've been focusing on for this first round?
I think this is too complicated, honestly. I'm trying to find information quickly, and like it seems like to look through all of this information, I might as well just review or just like look at the resource itself and provide my own opinion. Like, I think there needs to be a high level, like, you know, just overall a score. And then with the ability to provide some of these other, like, you know, options for why you're giving it that score. But like presenting just the overall score first, and then, okay, why did this person give it 1 star? I'll look into what they wrote about it to see if that would affect me.
So maybe, so if I'm hearing you correctly, then, you know, developing some way to summarize at a high level for quick access and interpretation, coming back to the very first points we were hearing earlier in terms of having that summary score that can quickly inform selection or support sorting of the materials. Would it be valuable to have this information as sort of a more detailed view if somebody wanted to dig more deeply? Or what do you see value in this level of detail, I guess?
Honestly, not from the user perspective. I feel like this information is good for the developer of the resource, but not helpful for me as a person coming to just try to find a good learning resource.
Great. Other comments?
So I don't know if it's just me, but I expected yes to be at the top, no to be at the bottom, and you have disagree at the top and agree at the bottom. So if I didn't look at it too carefully, I would kind of read these backwards. Also, it's the training clearinghouse, and you keep referring to resources. Would it just be simpler and more direct to say the purpose of the training is clear? Is the training effective? I start wondering what resource. Oh, we're talking about training, so it's just they're trainings. Call them trainings. The last question, examples from the sources of applicable to your data management needs, is so personalized that that's only going to be, like the last speaker said, of help to the developer, not to someone who wants to know how everybody else felt about this particular training resource.
So perhaps actually having different views of the survey results, depending on the consumer, could be useful. Is that one of the things I'm hearing here?
Exactly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think even the second question there, or I guess the third, was the difficulty of the resource content appropriate for your data management skill or expertise. For the purposes of a public review, if you don't know the person's skill or expertise, the ranking is kind of irrelevant. So for a detailed evaluation of the content developer, that might be appropriate, but I think it's sort of in line with what we've been saying, that there might need to be both a public and a non-public view of the content. And
you
also,
could fix that. Oh.
I was going to say, I'm not sure as a user of a review that the information is necessarily valid separated. The summaries of people's responses in the free text, if they scored it very high, I would want to know their direct feedback that was associated with that high score. And now it seems broken up. Of their written feedback is differentiated or broken out from the score, so you can't associate the two easily.
Right. Yeah, and I think Teddy, maybe were you the one who was making the comment about looking for the low ratings to see if there are particular if they're highlighting particular issues why they gave it a low rating, so you can have some context for interpreting their overall score or their comments.
Exactly. On question 3, because I know we're short of time here, one way to fix that is to ask if it was appropriate to the level of the target audience, which would be required to be filled out, which I noticed in the sample it wasn't.
Right. And that's and that's something that is part of the metadata for the learning resources, but that's something we've also talked about in terms of the actual use context that may be different from what's in the metadata. So yeah, that's helpful. And the one last very quick question that I want to ask before we move into our second scenario, which is, based on what you've seen, what sort of help or documentation would you expect to see or be looking for associated with these types of assessment capabilities within the clearinghouse? Or would you be looking for it at all?
I guess my question would be is, how do you anticipate the surveys being deployed? Do I, as a resource developer, choose which type of review that I get to reviewer survey that I get to associate with my resource? Or
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect any help text for how to fill in a review, but you've got 3 different types of surveys with very complex different questions. So in that context, I'm not sure what the end goal is.
Right. And in this case, yeah, the system is built in a way that resource creators could actually build their own survey from a set of either existing questions or their own questions. And so custom surveys can be built for each learning resource, or you can potentially have a broad survey that applies, that's reused for multiple learning resources. So those are both options. Okay, so
User, I wouldn't expect, I would expect it to be simple enough that I wouldn't need to click on something to learn more. Like I should just be able to be like, oh, this is a good resource, I should look at it.
Yep. And that reinforces my experience with a lot of web-based resources, is that if you're having to write a lot of documentation or help material, you've already sort of lost the battle.
Yeah,
As that's not something your users typically have the patience for.
I can see the value in customized surveys, but for the purposes of the portal, I'm not sure, does that introduce a new learnability question? Does the user have to relearn the survey or the questionnaire with every time they provide feedback? And I think that is a different usability question that which might provide some challenges.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good insight, and one that we should be thinking about in terms of possibly having a common core survey, but then having also the option for other customized surveys for those cases where there'd be significant benefit from them. Okay. Well, it's probably a good time for us to move on to the second scenario, and maybe just take a quick 2-minute break to stand up and stretch while I switch to the other set of materials for the next scenario. And then we can reconvene after you stretch, and we'll be ready to go for the next round. That sound good? Thanks, Teddy. That's helpful. And I guess, Susan, I would ask a question in terms of, will we have the chat preserved with the recording?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so maybe we can go ahead and reconvene for our second scenario. Hopefully folks had a chance to move and get the blood flowing just a little bit in between our 2 scenarios here. So this is one in which we're first actually changing roles, where we started in the previous scenario with our role essentially being as a learner. In this case, our role is as an instructor, or perhaps a submitter of content into the clearinghouse, but really focusing on instructors who are using learning resources as a part of their instruction activities. And so in this case, we're an instructor who is looking to provide feedback for a resource that they've used to inform their understanding of the resource and to make that information available to others. So more specifically, we're an associate professor at an iSchool teaching master's students about research data management. While we have experience teaching these classes about research data management, we have a continuing interest in expanding our repertoire of new learning resources or different learning resources that others are using. Prior to this semester, we've been searching in the DMTC and identify and reused a resource. So we've already selected a resource for teaching how to use, in this case, Python for research data management, that was originally created for a 4-hour workshop. And then also you notice that there are, while searching, you saw that the DMTC pages, that feedback is encouraged and you'd like to provide feedback. So you decided to do so, and you're hoping that your information will help others in deciding how the resource could be reused in their teaching and teaching activities and for determining the appropriate fitness for use. So that's the scenario we're working in for this next round. And again, the goal for us as the participants in this scenario is that we want to provide feedback for a resource that we have used to help inform others in their selection process. And with that, we can then move on to our first question again, which is similar to the previous one, but in this case, again, sort of on a scale ranging from never to always. How often do you leave feedback after you've used a product? Again, sort of addressing the underlying premise of the scenario of being interested in providing feedback. Are you a frequent feedback provider or not?
I honestly don't leave much feedback unless it's explicitly requested of me.
Mm-hmm. So some mechanism for more actively requesting feedback might help motivate you?
Potentially.
Potentially, yeah. I think about all the requests that I get and the frequency with which I respond. Other comments on this question of frequency or motivation to provide feedback?
I think it really depends what someone's going to do with that feedback. Like if I think in consumer behavior, if it's a small business and I know that my feedback is really going to make or break it for them, I'm more likely to leave a review than I would on, say, like an Amazon. So if there's some way to communicate the value of that feedback, I think that can go a long way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
I would add that sometimes the feedback I provide, I do that so that information remains available to me. I use the feedback system to expand my memory of what I liked so I can easily return to it. So I like platforms where I can see all my reviews. What was the name of that software I reviewed that did thus and such? Or what was the name of that book that had the really good exercise about Python or whatever? So like on Goodreads or IMDb or any GitHub platform where I'm a watcher, stuff like that. Really, the thing where I'm engaging is a way for me to extend my memory and get back to that place by seeing, quote unquote, all my favorites.
Okay.
So
So being
I'm
able to
selfish.
personalize, yeah. So this is almost like being able to potentially use reviews as personal bookmarks in the
Yep.
DMTC.
Yeah. So think about everything you do. Does it benefit the person who gives you their time? And if the answer is no, and they have to be an altruist to give you their time, they're probably going to give their time to other places after they give it to you once or twice. Because people will be an altruist, but only infrequently.
Right.
You
Yeah.
want them to
Serial
do it all the
altruism
is what do you call that? Diminishing returns of the serial altruist.
right.
But the idea
Yeah.
is if you want them to return, if you want the DMTC to be sticky and to incentivize people to leave feedback or create feedback, then you have to make that activity benefit them directly if you want them to do it a lot. And leaderboards are kind of off for this sort of thing. You don't really want a leaderboard of who gave the most stars because that's freaking weird.
Right. Right. And yeah, the gamification
Yeah.
isn't a strong motivator, you're thinking?
Not for this. I mean, read Cory Doctorow's Walk Away, but yeah, for this, a leaderboard would just turn people off.
So, you know, we've touched on a couple of different motivators for responding to feedback. Are there some other motivators that folks here can think of or suggest that we consider as a part of this assessment capability?
What will you know or track about your users? I guess I very rarely provide feedback, but one of the ones that I do or do interact with sometimes is if I'm asked a question, if they know I've downloaded or used a product or an item, they might send out a question anonymously that someone's asked. And that's a way to provide that feedback. And if you establish a community that I've answered their question, and if I submit a question to people that have used this product, they will answer it then.
Okay, so that sounds, if I'm hearing you correctly, that's almost like a community forum that could develop around particular learning resources. So there could be a little bit of an exchange of information versus sort of an accumulation of information.
Potentially, I mean, that might be a way to encourage feedback in a different way. But yeah, just generally populating a forum, I think you have to somehow incentivize it, or it's not something I would just do by default.
Right, right. Other motivators?
Keeping it simple is going to help a lot. The fewer questions, the better. Thinking like at the end of Uber Eats or Shipped, when they're telling you, they send you an email saying your order's been delivered. You click on the link and you can go and give the driver a tip, but you also get to evaluate the driver at the time. And it's usually, 3-4 clicks on a screen, not different screens. That also helps keep everything right there, because it doesn't feel like you're doing as much when you're not jumping from screen to screen. So keeping it simple, not making a lot of questions. Yeah, providing the open-ended text for comments you might want to make, but the simplicity, I think, is key. And as for frequency, I basically only review if it's really bad or really, really good. If it's kind of
Mhm.
just in the middle, I don't really bother saying too much.
So it sounds like there's an emotional element to that, to what motivates you, where you know they've either made you happy or surpassed your expectations, or somehow angered or pissed you off.
Exactly.
I would agree with the
Okay.
simplicity comment, and your previous results that you showed seemed like it was a very complex questionnaire. So potentially, if you want both, leave the option of 1 or 2 questions with free text. And if you would like to provide more feedback, here's the detailed survey. So do it like a 2-tiered, get the feedback from the most, which will be answering the simple form, but allow them to link through or click to the more complex questionnaire.
Okay, yeah, and actually a sequential or an optional sequential questionnaire could be an interesting option where, you know, folks can start with the simple and move on to the more complex. Okay, well, that's good. And so if we move on to, and this question is going to be similar to the one that we addressed earlier. So let me go back to, this is the view again of the learning resource without any of the assessment information injected into it. Now from the perspective of this scenario in which we're a learner trying to, who wants to provide feedback, where would your preferred location be to find the access point for being able to provide that feedback?
Top right, I think, is the easiest. It kind of denotes, something extra that's not necessarily essential to your job here, which is to find training. But on a JavaScript fail, you can always make that go to the bottom instead of before your actual content too.
And I guess in terms of visibility, there's placement. Would you prefer that option is available to all users, or only users that might be logged in who would be where it would only show up for folks that are logged into the system? So we haven't really talked about the authentication capabilities of the system before this. I'm just thinking of being able to differentially display the information in addition to position.
I would continue to show it even for people not logged in, just to show them a benefit of being logged in. Participation or access, yeah.
You go back here. Okay, that's great. Other suggestions in terms of, from the perspective of someone wanting to provide feedback, where placement would best be to facilitate that?
I concur with what's been said, the top right or right next to the title at the top.
Okay. Great. Other suggestions before we maybe move on to our next question?
I have a question about, you're not going to provide feedback until you've actually viewed, hopefully, the resource. So when I click on that URL, does it take me away from the clearinghouse? Or, because I think that would also depend, like if it just opened in a new tab or whatever, I don't know, hope it would do, I guess, then it'll still be up when with that. Like I close out the resource, I'm like, oh, that was good. Oh, right, there it is. Oh, I can provide feedback. Okay. So I think thinking about that workflow would be important. Because ideally,
so in this,
yeah.
So in
you would have like a way to provide feedback from the resource itself, but I know that's not possible in the way that this whole thing is set up.
Right. So perhaps having built into or a default behavior where it does open up in another tab or another window so that somebody can refer to the learning resource information while they're completing the survey. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I was talking about like the actual resource, like it opening up in another tab so that like you use it, you watch it, you look through it, and then you still have this place open where then you might see, oh yeah, I can provide feedback.
Okay, yes. Okay, I see what you're talking about. So yeah, looking at the resource itself as a reminder or reference as you're providing the feedback. Okay. Yeah, I think that could actually be quite helpful. Okay, and anything else on sort of the placement question? And then if not, then we can move on to our next question, which is again from the perspective now of the instructor who is wanting to provide feedback about a resource. In terms of the sample placement and icons and descriptive information that we have here, what do you have in terms of a reaction to this in the context of our current scenario?
I think similar to the last one, like there should just be one link that's like what you want them to do. So provide feedback. And then that takes you to a separate page where you can choose the type of feedback that you're providing. And then that would be more real estate to explain what you're looking for from the user.
Mm-hmm. And okay, that sounds good. And so sort of like, yeah, as we were hearing in the last example as well, we're not providing really enough context for folks to understand what they're being asked or what the capabilities are that they're being presented with. Other feedback from the perspective of this particular scenario or the instructor role?
So are you planning to have a different survey for someone who used this to teach as opposed to someone who used this to learn?
That's absolutely something that we've talked about in terms of being able to build surveys that are targeted at different audiences in terms of soliciting feedback from learners versus instructors and being able to characterize that. So that's definitely something that we've built into the capabilities of the system. But you know, we've actually built it with more flexibility than even just those different scenarios. But that is something that we anticipate would be sort of the low-hanging fruit of basic surveys that could be highly reused across many or all of our learning resources that are registered in the system.
And so when people are logged in, are they self-identified as one of those two?
No, but you know that actually is an interesting question, because right now the authentication system is pretty much a bare bones authentication of, you know, what identifier or identity, you know, username do you want to use and what password do you want to use. There is also integration with ORCID, which could provide some additional information, at least the public information from ORCID profiles that folks have associated with their clearinghouse accounts, but we haven't built into sort of our internal system for the user accounts that additional sort of profile information. But that I think is absolutely something that we should be looking at as a capability for enhancing the information we have about authenticated users.
You would have the option then to say, are you have you taught with using this resource? Would you like to evaluate it? I mean, to give them a personalized invitation then to evaluate it.
Right, and that would be that certainly would be the advantage to the system in terms of being able to for authenticated users being able to identify those users who actually follow the link out of the system to the learning resource itself, to be able to do some follow-up with them to see whether or not they used it, and to perhaps recruit them into providing some additional feedback.
But that way you would also be able to build on what someone else said earlier about using their own reviews as bookmarks.
Mm-hmm. Right. As a quick way once you're logged in, because again that it comes back to other forms of motivation in terms of participating or authentic working in the system as an authenticated versus unauthenticated user, and what benefits there might be for working as an authenticated user. Other feedback on sort of the clarity or suggestions about sort of the access path relative to what we're showing here for being able to submit a survey, or again, trying to put ourselves in the shoes of someone who's trying to figure out how to do that before we move on to our next question, actually looking at the presentation of a sample survey. Not hearing anything. Let me go ahead and then bring up our sample. And this is again the same sort of earlier iteration that doesn't have the icons, and just in this case the links that are associated with the surveys are again pointing to the survey that is available to be taken. There's no link to the survey results on this page. Any comments on this as an alternative view or for being able to access a survey?
Could you repeat that? Because I see the links at the top that say available assessment surveys. I don't understand the question either because I'm dense or brain dead.
Well, at this stage in the session, I would be more likely that it's the what is it, the latter.
Well,
in
you're
terms
right.
of stunning you into submission. So these are and this is probably part of the question is it clear that these are links that can take you to a survey that you can take in an effort to provide feedback?
No.
And,
No, it should just say log in to give feedback.
Yeah.
Like a one-liner, right?
Yeah.
And then they
Okay.
see the list of all the options or whatever the incentives are.
Mm-hmm. And I guess another question is, as someone who's looking to be able to provide feedback, are there different types of categories or reviews that you might expect to see? So if we sort of go beyond the titles that we have here that aren't necessarily clear in their context. If we had descriptive titles that related to different categories of reviews that could be provided, what might you be looking for? As this then translates into what kind of survey might you expect to see when you click on a
Wow.
button or a link?
Simple, like 1 to 5 stars and a text blurb. And then the ability as a user to sort and see only the 1s or only the 5s and the blurbs for those.
Uh-huh.
And that beyond that, I think that's more for internal use or people who want to dig deeper or something. I don't know.
Okay, so following with the keep it simple model.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't expect to be asked to self-identify what type of feedback that I needed or wanted to provide as a user. I would expect the form to select that if there's different options.
Okay, yep. So back to the point of providing the option that we're looking for instead of providing too many choices for the user that they really don't necessarily want or need to make.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being truly honest, I'm not sure I've ever seen a form selecting feedback that asks me to identify what type of feedback that I want to provide.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful.
I mean, occasionally you will see different variations of the form. Like I've said, you know, if you can have them identify their role as like a user or a teacher, that could give them different sets of questions, but that is itself a question of the survey and not something that I, as the user, would need to select.
Yep. And so it's more a matter of, you know, there may be particular instances where a more specialized or targeted survey would be developed, but those would be rare and one-off situations and not necessarily something that the general, in this case, instructor would be looking for. It would be more a matter of, you know, if there was some sort of study being conducted where there is a specific survey developed for that study, that folks that are participating in the study might be pointed to a particular survey. But other than that, for the purposes of the clearinghouse, just keeping it generic and simple. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's go to our sample survey itself. So this is basically the sample rendering at this point of one set of questions. This is the learner consumer survey, representing the types of questions that we're able to ask and the types of inputs. We're not as much looking for feedback on the specifics of the questions themselves, but more, you know, our presentation of the survey, the clarity of the survey, recommendations about how we could make it most usable and understandable, again, from the perspective of somebody who's coming in to try to provide feedback on a particular learning resource that they have that they've encountered. So thoughts on the sort of the positioning of the elements, the layout, the clarity, what could be improved?
I think that it might just need to be shorter. Like, I think there might be too much here.
Uh-huh.
I think similar to what the comments from before.
Mm-hmm. So brevity and simplicity are keys to the usability of the survey.
Yes.
Okay. Other suggestions or comments?
So here's just one quick thing. I noticed they all open again to strongly disagree, but I would usually expect it to default to something neutral.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I think instead
How
of
what,
I would anticipate having having all of the responses available to be clicked.
Yeah, some kind of
okay, so
Likert scale
having a
slider.
Or radio buttons across, yeah.
Okay, so being able to quickly, so the user can quickly scan all the options and select them as opposed to having to pop up a list to even find out what the options are.
Right.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Other comments? And I guess since I'm not hearing anything and we may be reaching the point of exhaustion, and I also saw Nancy and Sophie join us, suggesting that the other breakout room, the breakout room may have finished their work. This may be a good time to ask our last question here in terms of, there's the question about categories earlier. This sort of flips that in terms of what are the areas as an instructor that you would actually be most interested or willing to provide feedback on, assuming that feedback would then influence the further development or refinement of that learning resource, or provide useful information to folks that would come behind you. What are some of the categories of feedback you would be most willing to provide?
One of the categories, I guess, is whether or not it matched the promised target audience, because that's probably how the instructor is going to be searching for training.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I'm not sure how to say it, how easy it was to adapt to their particular situation.
Okay, yeah. So that would then address sort of the reusability.
Yes.
Okay. Other areas that folks see that they'd be most willing to provide feedback about or learning resources that you've used as an instructor?
I was also going to say audience. I mean, I think just confirming what the descriptors are, whether the audience, the subject, the class duration, like, are those accurate or not? Because those are the things that I would decide or use to decide to incorporate it into a presentation or workshop that I would be doing.
Mm-hmm. How willing would you be to provide information about the context in which you used the resource? So this sort of gets back to the question of sort of suitability for purpose. Given you may have used it in a slightly different context than described in the documentation, and capturing information about that experience. Is that information you would be willing to provide?
Potentially, I think that goes back to how long are you going to make the questionnaire?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
a yes, no checkbox is pretty quick to populate, whereas
Mm-hmm.
like free text answers take longer.
Right. Right. Because that's
Also,
something that we've been talking about. Go ahead. Yep.
oh, I was saying, I made a comment in the text, the chat, I'm sorry, about if you ask somebody if they did use it to train and then maybe popped open 3 more questions if they did, and then directed and made very focused directed questions like, you know, the class size you used, that might be, that might have some bearing on what the developer will, you know, what the kind of information the developer will need to change the thing. Because somebody used it on a small class and it was really good, but someone used it on a big class and it wasn't good. That's something they might want to explore at some point. But if you ask very pointed questions about, okay, so you did use it in a classroom setting where you were teaching it, here's things which are pertinent to that. So, you know, get feedback from there instead of too many questions and instead of leaving it too open-ended.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And so I guess at this point, since it looks like everybody may be back in our room, this would be a good time for us to wrap up our individual scenario discussions and reconvene for our wrap up. And I guess we can just transition immediately since we're all here. So I'd like to start with a huge thank you to Sophie in particular, who we have continuously roped into all of these usability, user assessment activities. And you have been a great contributor and sport for bringing your expertise into this, as Nancy and I have learned a lot from working with you on this. But then also all of you who have soldiered through and remain fully engaged in our conversations through these scenarios. I know that in our discussions in our session, I learned a tremendous amount, and there's some great feedback here that I think we can immediately build into our design and thinking about how to finalize our approach to the assessment capabilities for this. And maybe I'll hand it over to Sophie and Nancy for some additional comments.
I'll let you start, Sophie.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Nancy. It's always been great to work with both of you. And that's why I think it doesn't feel like work. It's been since 2015, right, Nancy? But it's just being
Before
so
that,
much fun.
actually, 2000.
Yeah. It's just been so much fun. But yeah, I agree with Carl. I'm always so appreciative of the community giving us feedback. I love doing co-designing or usability testing with the community, but we couldn't do this without the community. So again, today it showed that everybody was just so willing to help and give us feedback and help us innovate. So thank you so much. I really enjoy this, and I looking forward to helping out and doing more with the community. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add to that is it'll be really interesting to compare and contrast the comments that come from the different people looking at the different scenarios and really, you know, putting the hats on of being a learner and then being an instructor, not only in our little group with the breakout, but also in the other Carl's group as well. So, you know, it'll be hard to please everyone, but the feedback will allow us to find some place in the middle as a place to start, and then, you know, there's always possibility of iteration too as we find out how this works. One of the things I did mention in the other group is that we've been working with other catalogs and clearinghouses and registries around the globe, actually, and since 2015, and there are a lot of them that are not quite as old, so to speak, as the clearinghouse, are just now starting to think about this kind of assessment and understanding the value of it. So we're a little bit ahead of the game in terms, and thanks to IMLS for recognizing that this is something that people would really need and use. And again, the community kind of affirming that, I think it's really important to do. It will be a challenge to, I think that the big challenge, once we come up with a good way of doing this, would be then for people to come back to actually leave reviews, because a lot of this is dependent upon people, coming back to the Clearinghouse to actually do that in the spirit of helping others. So helping to develop a community of practice, which is so critical for this kind of training and trying to change the data ecosystem, which is what the education industry and areas is really intended to do. So so hopefully, if everyone stays in touch and keeps giving us feedback, we'll find ways to have you do that more easily as time goes on, and as I say, keep iterating on this whole process. So thanks very much.
And I should also thank Christina, who, as I just had a chance to go back to our shared session documents, and for her great note taking of everything that was coming up during our discussion, and to Susan for both participating and keeping an eye on the clock, and keeping us on track along our timeline so that we didn't drift into dark corners in which we would have difficult time extracting ourselves. So thank you. And I just shared my screen one last time just to provide a little bit of an indication of where we're going from here. As we've talked about, what our goal here has been is to get your feedback to feed into the user interface development for, in this case, especially the user, the assessment components. But there's actually, from our conversations in the main room, some other insights that I'm certainly taking out of your comments that we're going to be able to roll into the broader Clearinghouse before we go to the final release. So we're still working on the development of the question management, question group management, and survey management. Those are all capabilities that we're exposing through the web interface. Back to some of the comments that I was making during our discussion in terms of being able to have strong customizability options for building surveys that meet particular needs. And I don't know what necessarily came up in the breakout room, Sophie and Nancy, but the theme of simple and simpler and simplest came up quite a few times in our discussion as we think about the types of surveys that we maybe aim for, with then specific, more custom surveys possibly being more exceptional, as we aim for simple and quick capture of feedback in many circumstances. But building our interface based on the lessons from our discussions here. Integrating, I mentioned also, briefly the authentication option for bringing in the ORCID login capabilities, which can provide some connectivity to public profiles, helping to answer some of or automatically answer some of the questions about context for some survey responses if we have authenticated users with associated profiles. The development of the user interface for the learning resource submission and workflow for publication, that we have all of the back end largely in place for that. It's just a matter of building the user interfaces for that, and then ultimately going live with the Clearinghouse. So this is where we're headed, and that's going to be our task in the coming months as we get an initial release out there, get some additional feedback on it, and hopefully have one more chance at a light refinement before the end of our funding cycle from IMLS. So at this point, I'd invite any other questions or comments. And thanks again, everybody, for hanging in there with us and helping us out through this exercise.
Adventure. I call it an adventure.
And before everyone drops off, don't forget to join us at 6 o'clock Eastern. So in about a little less than an hour and a half for the research showcase. We have almost 50 posters and videos and demos. I scrolled through them earlier and there's some really great stuff in there that I know you don't want to miss.
Great. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Christina.
Thanks, Sophie.
Yep.
Thank
Carl.
you. Thank you all.